Hello and welcome to Colleague 7 Sprint Review for 17.11.02. This is for the development undertaken between the 15th of November to the 28th of November. We start with the sprint goal, and it was basically the same as our last sprint. Our aim was to continue to enhance and refine the search based on client feedback and to complete phase 3 of the right to consent GDPR work. Looking at the high level items and to explain further, in this sprint we've added the option to select and include custom fields and custom data dictionary fields into the search options and selection screen options. We've completed the right to consent GDPR work at an individual record level, and I'll be giving a full demonstration on that feature shortly. We've updated the diary creation process so that you can add durations to all diary appointments and have a default duration to that as well. We've added the option to edit the text and color of flag settings in the search. We've fixed an issue on searching for records with no value. That's for lookups, yes, no fields and date fields. And we've introduced a show and hide options to the criteria in the search. We've also delivered a user setting that will allow users to stipulate if they want to open records into a new tab when they're clicking on them from the search results. We'll now go through some demonstrations on the key features from this sprint. Okay, so there's quite a few things to cover as part of this sprint review. What I'll do first and foremost is do all of the updates, relating to the search area to begin with. We'll then do the diary, and then I'll do a end-to-end cover of the GDPR right to consent work that was delivered as part of this sprint. So to begin with, if we start with the search area, and I'll go through all of the updates in this area one at a time. The first thing I'll cover, and it's just the simplest things, just gets us started, and that's the way that you show results and you show criteria now. It used to be that when you clicked on show results, it would scroll down from above and criteria would be beneath the results when you're viewing that. That now has gone so that essentially the criteria will fade out and the results will fade in on the selection of show results. So that just keeps it clean for the user when they're using that. But that's a minor update that was made there. Next point to cover is on records with no value. So this is the update that was made for all lookup lists, yes, no fields and date fields as well. The top option that you'll find on any drop-down list within the search is an option for no value. So that's obviously to indicate that it's not a case that any of the available options within that drop-down list has been selected. The field essentially is empty. So if you select no value there, it's going to find all instances of a record where from that field there is no entry within there. This comes into effect for say yes no fields and drop down lists to highlight when you have no entry within that field, but also for date fields as well. So it's been implemented with GDPR in mind, as you will have situations where perhaps the right to consent is no, but that's because you're pending a response. So you'll need to be able to find all instances of records where you have sent off a request, but you've not received a response yet, and this will allow you to do that, because you'll be able to say that know that a consent has been requested, but perhaps the response to that request has yet to be received, and so thus you obviously have a list of records there where you're still pending a response. So it's been done with that in mind as well, but also as a point of note, it was an error of the system that needed a fix to it, because previously when you clicked on that, the found count wouldn't update correctly. So there's been a fix applied there, and it's also been enhanced upon. Anyway, that's the records with no value update. Okay, so the next point to cover is on the flag settings. So the flag settings are the option available of selected items when you're on a search result. So if I quickly I get a search result together here. So I'm on a search result, and essentially it's the scenario where you want to highlight some records and off selected items flag them as being a certain thing. So whether or not you want to highlight that they are interested, or not to contact them, or whatever reason. Essentially the idea is to give you a set of flag settings which you can edit with colors that you want to stipulate, and then that allows you to freely highlight rows within search results based on what the situation is with that record. So if I quickly go to the admin area quickly just to show you what we've done here. So off the system section, there's an option now called search settings. And if we go into there, you'll find these any settings relating to the search within this area. And what we've done is we've added an option called flag settings. And this area will list out all of the different flag setting options that are available. So there'll be up to 10 different flag settings that you can assign. You can name those as you see fit. Set the text color as you wish using this color picker option. And you can also see from that example column how that will then come out and appear. So you can basically set any color that you like here. Whereas with 6 you had one set of flag settings for all of the different search types, you've got 4 different flag settings now for each main entity type. So there'll be a flag settings for the candidate, flag settings for company, and obviously the flag settings for the requirement for each of those search types. And obviously all of the colors and everything associated with that are all unique per entity type. So if we go back to the candidate search and just highlight that this is where you can access those flag settings and the colors of those come through. So essentially you have a key to explain what each color type means. Also, what you can do is include flag as a column within the option types. So if you want to sort by flag, you can now do that. So if we select, say, arrange interview against there, let's set that one as well to something else also, say update CV. I mean, obviously those are just example flag settings that I've set there, but you can name those as you need to. But what you can obviously then do is sort by flag, and then that groups all of those different flag types together. Anyway, that's the work that we've done with relating to flag settings. Okay, so the next point to cover relates to the ability to now view custom fields within the search option types and the selection screen types as well. So this is both for the selection screen as well, but I'll demonstrate it from the search just for simplicity of view really. So if we start by just creating a search result, and if I just bring through those results, so what you can now do is essentially have custom fields come through, which is an option that wasn't there before. So from a candidate record, a contact, a company, a requirement, against those entity types, you're going to have obviously this tab where you can have custom fields which you then store relevant to your business, essentially in terms of what's important for you as additional fields to the standard schema set that are obviously given with colleague. And what we didn't have before was the option to be able to pull those through into search results, which is obviously now there. So from the options list that you can access there, essentially any custom fields that you have will be available to be able to pull through into the search result. If for whatever reason you would not like a certain custom field to come through within the admin area, within custom fields, you can obviously then access all of the custom fields relating to each different main entity type. And if you select the custom field, you've got this option here of allow selection, and that's a yes/no field there. So they'll all be set to yes by default. So everything from a custom field perspective is there's the option to include that in the search or in the selection search. But yeah, if you don't want that for any reason, there's the option to turn that off. And that's the update that we've made there. Okay, so the next point, or the final point to cover relating to the search, is to do with the option to open up records into new tabs. So this is as simple as it sounds really. From a search result, let me just create a search result quickly. From a search result, it is possible to essentially click on a record and it open up into a new tab now. The option was always there to right click and open a new tab, but essentially this just makes it more straightforward to be able to just click on a record and obviously open up that record from the search result. This is done so from an admin setting, but also a user setting as well if you want to override the admin setting. So you've got an admin setting here for search settings called open search results in new window. You just set that to yes or no. And you've also obviously got a user setting as well that you can stipulate here. If I change that to search options, and then again you've got open search results in new windows, and again you can set that to yes or no. If that's set, if the user setting is set to yes, it's going to override whatever was set within the admin area. If this setting was set to blank, it's obviously going to refer to whatever the admin setting is as a default across the system. But essentially that just works as you would expect it to on clicking on any of the records within the system. It will, sorry, within the search result, it will open up the record into a new tab. So that's essentially the update that's been made there. Okay, so the next point to cover relates to the creation of diary appointments and how you can now assign a default duration. So when I talk about creating a diary appointment, what I'm referring to is when you're creating a history, you have the option here of creating a diary appointment, which you can then tick on. And what you can now do is set the end date and time of that diary creation. If I just go quickly to your user settings, there's both user and global settings, admin settings, sorry, that kind of dictate this. But what you have is the option to set the default duration of a new diary entry. So whether that be an hour or half an hour or 15 minutes, just as you have a default reminder option for the diary as well, you now have the default duration for the diary. So if we just go back to this screen, what that will do, if it's been set as, say, an hour, it will mean that when you're assigning your start date and you're putting your hour there, the end date will immediately update automatically in response to what you've set against your start date, being that the default duration is an hour that I've set there in my user settings. You can then obviously edit this as well. But yeah, essentially, whatever you enter into your start date, based on that default duration, the end date is going to respond to and update automatically. And that's basically the update that's been made for the diary creation there. So say it's the user setting for setting that, and also there's an admin setting for obviously setting it system-wide as well, which is available from global settings. So that's the update that's been made there. Okay, so we've come to the stage in the review where we're going to go through the GDPR related works for right to consent. So I'm going to cover that entire workflow front to end, and essentially go through what our plans are also moving forwards relating to this functionality also. As part of phase 1, which was delivered a couple of sprints back now, there was the introduction of this extra icon and workflow off the top of the toolbar menu when you're on a candidate or contact record. So as standards, all records on the system are going to have this GDPR consent not given display that you see there, and obviously you've got an icon there with a cross in it. If you click on that field, you can see that you've got GDPR consent given no, and then obviously you've got consent requested on, which is a date field, and a response received on, which is a date field. Now the idea is that these aren't fields that you should be editing. That they're in there as writable fields as it currently stands. We're going to be adding in user settings or user privilege settings to allow these to be either writable or non-writable. But essentially, that's the kind of the reason for that GDPR area there in terms of the fields that are being held behind it. But the point of obviously the consent is relating to GDPR is that if you have any candidate records or any contact records created on the system, you need to seek consent to store their data. So as part of that, what we've done is introduce the workflow to allow for that. That's in a streamlined and automated method as possible. So off the email form, what you have now is an option here for request GDPR consent. But before I show you that, what I want to do quickly, just to make sure that it's kind of covering the bases, I just want to go to the admin area quickly and just show you some of the settings that are going on in the background. So first of all, it's within the global settings area. So first and foremost, within both the candidate section and the contact section, you've got this option of enable GDPR right to consent feature. So that will actually dictate whether or not any of this appears, but obviously that needs to be implemented over the course of next year as a matter of legislation as part of GDPR. But we've also got a section within there called GDPR Consent, which when clicked on will bring through the three main fields which allow this feature to be editable in the way that obviously we feel that you're going to want to have it editable. So in terms of how this is broken down, the email body content will be populated here. So this is the content that comes through when you press on that button. So to demonstrate what I mean by that, if I go to the candidate record, I'll go to email. You have to imagine that you'd write an email to the candidate, and then at some point over the course of that email, you would click on this button, and what that will do is it will generate links of yes and no, and it will pull through in the email content from here. So that as you can see there, that text that we've added in here, that's being pulled from here, and then obviously the yes and no have hyperlinks set within here as well. So we're trying to make this completely editable, and so that you can choose how you want to word it, how you want to put that request to the recipient in terms of seeking their consent, and whether or not you want to say yes, no, or you want to say I agree to these terms or I don't agree to these terms. Say, but for simplicity purposes, this is what we'll ship in terms of the text and in terms of yes, no being the option. So on the basis of you sending this email, which will send it now, and that going off, what it will do straight away is it would have updated the GDPR consent field, so the consent requested on date field will be populated, and whenever you go into this record from then onwards, it will state that it's awaiting the consent from the candidate or the contact, and obviously stating the date that you requested the consent. If we go now to our email, I'll just open that up. The email that you then receive is obviously a standard email that any candidate or contact would receive from you, but you have this option here of stipulating yes or no, clicking on those links, yes or no. And what basically you're trying to do is make it as simple as possible for the candidate to confirm their consent. So what we'll do is we'll click. We'll do no to begin with, actually. Now, what happens when we clicked on no there is that the user was then redirected to a URL page. Now, this is our default consent denied URL page, which obviously has our branding there, and it mentions us there. But what you'll see off the global setting here is that you've got a web page link here to navigate. So our recommendation is obviously that for your own web pages, your own websites, that you create a consent denied and a consent received web page. And on clicking on essentially these options, the user or the candidate or the contact is going to be taken to this page, just confirming basically that you've received that request. Now, from the candidate records perspective, say the end user records perspective, if we just refresh that page, that consent has now come through. So we selected no, and obviously the candidate has not given our consent, and the record must be deleted is the alert message that you're going to see there. If we just click on these fields, you see obviously the response received date field was populated, and obviously the consent given response was updated as well. And also as part of that, history records were created through this process where you requested consent where consent was denied. Also, you'd have noticed as well a notification came through. So obviously you're not always going to be on this candidate record, you're going to be elsewhere in the system, but a notification comes through advising you that this candidate record has not given their consent, and obviously you must delete that record, and then obviously a link is there to then open up this candidate record or contact record there. So if we just clear that off. As it currently stands, obviously the consent's not been given. Winding back the clock now, obviously we've gone through the process of the consent not being given. We're now going to take the more optimistic approach that the consent has been given. So if we return to the email, and this time we'll select yes here. Obviously we're taken to the consent thank you for confirming your consent page, consent given. And obviously, again, our recommendation is that you would create your own web page on your own website that's essentially advising the same messaging. Confirming that you've received their consent and that their record on your system has been updated accordingly. If we now go back to the candidate record, and I'll refresh that there. Right, so you can now see that the GDPR consent has been given. If we just take a quick look there, the consent given as coming in as yes. Consent was requested on, and obviously the dates have been populated within there. You also see that a notification has come through, because obviously we were on this record, but we could have easily been elsewhere in the system, just confirming that we've received consent from this candidate record, and you may retain that candidate's details. There's not really an action to perform post receiving that consent. It's just, as a matter of course, advising you obviously that that consent has come through, and we'll clear that one off. And then consent essentially is in place. So that has been delivered on the basis of it being generated from an individual record. We can obviously appreciate that as standard you'll be looking to deploy mailers to a range of candidates and contacts, essentially wanting to send out your request for their consent in bulk, and obviously receiving their responses and acting on them accordingly. So as it currently stands, the workflow that's been added is on an individual record basis, and what we're now doing as part of the next sprint is implementing phase 4, which is the introduction of this option at a bulk level. So from a search result, being able to generate a email and sending in bulk that request, and obviously all of those recipients receiving unique links to be able to select yes or no, and obviously the updates that they set coming through into their associated records and updating their records accordingly, and obviously history records being created as part of that process. So that's where we are with GDPR consent. I say it's quite a lot to take in and cover, and as part of GDPR as a overall project, there's still, from my part, videos to record and documentation to write, just to make sure that everyone is clear on how all of this functionality has been set up and is working. But this was quite of a big update for us in terms of this release, to making sure that the consent option had been applied, and it's now in there, and it's obviously been tested extensively relating to its updating of records. So we're very happy with it to be part of this release. If you have any questions on this feature, please let me know. But hopefully I've been able to demonstrate that it's in place, but is also heavily configurable to suit your needs. And that's what we've done with GDPR there. As always, if you have any queries or feedback, please get in touch. I'll be keen to hear from you. Also, for those using Colleague 7, feel free to submit your enhancement requests via the user voice integration. The next video will be the sprint plan for 17.12.01, and as always, that will contain a high-level overview on the items we intend to work on during that sprint. Thanks for watching.